So, Mike, every year on the Culture Cast, we do a month for you. One of my closest friends, someone who I consider a big part of my podcasting journey. But this year, it's not March. It's Mike White May.
Yeah. Why'd you push me back?
I don't know, man. I don't even remember what we did in March at this point. Like,
I think it was Jess fired March.
Was it? No.
Was it?
No, because Jess is always like June or July. What was March? I don't even remember. God, fucking, I don't know. But yeah, it's Mike White May, everybody. And you know what that means. It's going to be movies that are way too highbrow for this show normally. Just
means
kidding.
Your wife is just going to hate me even more, Chris.
See, Mike, I made a decision to know that when Mike White March or May rolls around, it's just going to be me watching the movies. I was going to fuck off to my idiot hole for an hour and a half, watch my movie, and then come back and be like, what did you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Oh. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, on this episode of the Culture Cast, I am still your host, Chris Stashu. Much to the chagrin of many, the voices you've heard them before, but you're hearing them once again. I'll introduce them. The man of the hour, the man who hosts the Projection Booth podcast. He's Mike White. May's Mike White.
Yeah, named after me.
Yeah, not the film director Mike White.
Right. Yeah.
Infinitely more important Mike White is.
I don't know about that. I've never gotten Jennifer Coolidge a Golden Globe, so
fair.
Not yet, you haven't.
Right?
Not yet, yeah.
Wow. Oh my God.
Oh, wow.
Me hot dog real bad. God. Yeah, because that's what the ghost of Milos Forman wanted on this episode of the show, was for us to do Jennifer Coolidge impersonations while talking about
Jennifer Coolidge impression.
And also joining us, they are one of the hosts of the Scary Stories We Tell podcast, your friend and mine, Jess Byard.
Hello.
Hi.
I completely didn't remember what the theme of this month was.
So speaking
And
of
now I know
that,
who to blame.
yes.
Speaking
Now you
of
know.
that, the more you know, I've heard. So as I mentioned, it is Mike White May, and we are doing movies that Mike, you programmed. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you and tell me a little bit about why we're talking about the films of Milos Forman holistically, and then why did you pick 1964's Czerny Peter, otherwise known as Black Peter?
Mně se taky ledacos nelíbilo v životě, ale musel jsem se postavit. A kolikrát často proti své vůli. To ze mě udělalo chlapa. Co chceš dělat? Odpověz. Co chceš dělat? Nemám ti za zlé, že nevíš. V tvém věku se to stává. Ale dokud nebudeš vědět, co máš dělat, budeš dělat to, co chci já.
Není to dávno, co má brada byla holá, když tu náhle přišel vous malý a zrzavý. Koupil jsem si holení a večer místo školení holil jsem se potají, tak jak to hoši dělají, když mě náhle prozradili boty vrzaví.
Na prstech bychom spočítali, kolik chlapců chce do kšeftu. Je takhle, každý chce být astronautem, kosmonautem, radiomechanikem a když nějakého kluka dostaneme, tak je to určitě nějaký kripl.
Já jsem ti řekl ahoj, jsem ti taky řekl ahoj. No jo, ale jak? Ahoj. Ty jsi mi řekl oj. Slyšíš ten rozdíl? Ahoj. Oj. Slyšíš to jo? Dále. Ahoj. Oj. Slyšíš to jo? Ahoj.
Why? Well, I think it might have come partially from a conversation we were having about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I don't think, now, have you seen that one?
Nope.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Which Andy Roush on the last episode,
movies.
he was like, hey, what Milos Forman movies are you doing? And I rattled him off and he was like, have you seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? Like, I have not. And he was like, Mike did not pick that, I see.
yes. Well, I could have gone with the easy ones. I could have gone with Ragtime or Amadeus or Hair or Man on the Moon.
Yeah.
The People versus Larry Flint, but I said, this guy has only, quote unquote, only directed 22 films or fewer than that, because I think there are things in his filmography on IMDb that are not really films. There's some shorts, there's a music video, there's a lot of stuff of his that I haven't seen though. And this was one of them. I've had this on my to watch list for a long damn time. And that's how I did all of these films this month. So it is Milos Forman films that I haven't seen. And as Just Byard so eloquently put it, instead of Mike White made, maybe it is Mike White made a mistake.
But wait, there's more, because
all those movies you named, and you picked the one about the guy who works at a grocery store.
Well, it is very
kinda.
Yeah, it's interesting that this does fit in his filmography really well. Like looking at If Only They Ain't Had Them Bands and then Audition, and then you see Black Peter, it really leads well into Loves of a Blonde and then Fireman's Ball, which really, Loves of a Blonde helps put him on the world stage. Fireman's Ball takes him to the next level. It's kind of repetitive, a little bit of A Blonde in Love, but a little bit, past that. And then we'll talk about Taking Off maybe next week. And that puts him in America. And shortly after that, he does Cuckoo's Nest and just right off the map.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing about Milos Forman that I do think is interesting, Mike, because you have given me the opportunity several times on your show to be part of commentaries for some of the releases that have been Czech New Wave films. And so this is kind of like right in there.
Oh, boy. Yeah, it sure is.
Which is really funny because, like you mentioned, Jess, like, why pick this movie? And if in a lot of ways, like, it's a slice of life, folks. It is. It's a slice of life in a less interesting way than All My Good Countrymen was, another Czech New Wave film. But to your point, Mike, like this fits right smack dab into that like milieu of Czech New Wave, because those movies, similarly to this one, can be interpreted and would rightfully be interpreted and, again, could be lambasted as meandering. Cassandra Cat, I don't think so much, but All My Good Countrymen in this movie, you could make the case that they're kind of meandering. But I think I think it's less about what's going on, really, because there's so little going on. And I think it's more of just setting a mood and a vibe and just letting the players play their parts and seeing what comes of it. But I also felt the same way about those Czech New Wave films that I was able to work with you on, Mike. I felt the same way. It's like, this is a very interesting way of making film that is unique and distinct to a time and a place, which is the 60s in Eastern Europe, Czechoslovakia more specific.
Right. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong. I like a movie that is purely a vibe and a place. And I think, for me, that this is a vibe and a place that I do not connect with, nor do I want to connect with, really. It's not a pleasant place.
It's like comparing Godard and Truffaut, where I feel Truffaut always had a little bit more story and a little bit more of a plan, and Godard always felt very messy. This feels more like it's messy and feels very, we've got credited writers on here. We've got Forman himself, we've got Jaroslav Papusek, and Popsek, he worked with Forman on these movies, the ones that I'm talking about, the A Blonde in Love, Fireman's Ball. He also worked on Intimate Lighting with Ivan Passer, who was another co-conspirator of Forman's, and that's very much the same, to even down to the idea of musical instruments and, just very awkward social gatherings. I mean, that seems to be the thing with these movies. I mean, Blonde in Love or Loves of a Blonde has this whole thing of, hey, here's this town where there are much more women than there are men, so we're going to bring in these soldiers and we're going to try to pair them up, and there's this big social gathering. Fireman's Ball, It's right in the title, folks. There is a fireman's ball in that, and it's very much this same thing. So like they were not necessarily treading water, but they definitely had ideas as far as like, we're going to take people and put them in this social situation. Some of them will be professional actors. Some of them won't be professional actors, and we'll just see what happens when we let them loose and put a camera on them. And I think that the results are a little bit more, what's that phrase? Your mileage may vary. Some of the results are better than others. Right. I think there's much more structure in A Blonde in Love. I think that they, start with that idea, and they've got some really good performances in there, and then they really structure more of a narrative around that. Same thing with Fireman's Ball. This one, there isn't that much of a narrative, and it's really like big chunks of improv feeling scenes where it's, okay, Peter goes to work at this place, doesn't do a really good job. He is supposed to be watching for shoplifters. He goes home and talks to his dad about, I let the shoplifter go, but I followed him. And then his dad berates him. And we just get that kind of pattern of like, he comes home and then his mom berates him. He comes home and his dad berates him. And it's just, after a while, it got a little old where I was just like, okay, I mean, I guess I can see what they're doing, talking about, the Society of Czechoslovakia in 1963 when this was made, or 64. But yeah, I feel you, Jess. This was not necessarily something where I was just like, oh, this is compelling cinema. Had I been in a cinema watching this, I think it would have been a lot easier than sitting on my couch watching this, because I was just so tempted to start looking at other things.
Yeah, to be distracted by everything else. I would agree with that. I think that movies like this that are more slow, meandering, not particularly there to tell a story per se, but to give you kind of an insight on what the culture and the life is for people of this, time and place. And being in the movie theater, at least, like that's all you can watch. You're focused. I had a very hard time staying focused. I mean, really, this movie's not an hour and a half of a lot of nothing happened. These characters are also going. There's no arc. There's no real conflict between any of the characters other than like a rivalry between the two bricklayer boys and Peter. But even that is very anticlimactic. I mean, anticlimactic is pretty much this movie. But I like a good slice of life movie. I do. But again, I need the characters to be at least enough to carry the film.
Yeah, Peter isn't very compelling. Like, even as this kind of milquetoast guy, he reminds me a little bit of the main character from Closely Watched Trains, where he's not that active of a person. He more lets things happen passive to him. Yes. But even with that character, I mean, he's got a lot more personality, and he does make some decisions and does do some stuff. Whereas for Peter in this, just is constantly put upon, and he never really stands up for himself.
No, and it's never really established. And here's, for me, my barrier. I'm not familiar with Czechoslovakia in the 60s. I don't understand. I can gather that the whole bricklayer thing is, it's seems to be that Peter is looking his nose down at the blue collar lifestyle that is tradition for men at the time. And, we do get a bit at the end of one of, the many speeches where, he mentions that Peter played guitar and things like that. And so, we get this idea that sure, Peter's probably somebody who wants a little more exotic of a life for himself, that he doesn't want to remain in this town and just be a bricklayer and just, become his father, essentially. But I don't know what Peter does want to do. I only learned that he played guitar from his father in the very last speech of the movie. Right.
Like, in the closing minutes of the film.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about Peter whatsoever, other than he's kind of a timid guy, but not even really so timid that it's a major problem in his life. Like, there is a confrontation with him and the two bricklayer boys, but it goes absolutely nowhere. And at no point is there any kind of like actual feeling of tension or drama or whatever that should be happening there. Instead, we get a really weird scene of one of the boys' shorts falling down. I guess that's what happened. I don't know. I was really confused by that scene as to what the joke was.
Well, I mean, for a lot of the film's runtime, I honestly felt like I was waiting for Forman to make a decision on something to do, because you get a lot of these scenes. I mean, Jess, you and I were texting back and forth while we were watching it, and you were maybe like 10, 20 minutes behind me, and you were like, is this whole movie going to be at this dance scene? And
yeah.
Like, what's surprising to me is, again, this 85-minute runtime film. So comes in at a breezy hour and 25. It's not even an hour and a half long, but there are scenes that feel like they take up a majority of what's happening like they take up a majority of the runtime of the film. And yet nothing happens in those scenes memorable enough for me to remember that, oh yeah, this is what happened at the dance. At the dance, it seems like Peter is just walking in circles, interacting with people, and ultimately, to what end? It like you mentioned, Jess, we're never made aware as an audience, and there's nothing wrong with this in a way. There's plenty of films that we've all seen, the three of us separately and together, I'm sure, that are films where the main character is a cipher and the audience is meant to be, he is the analog or they are the analog for us. And it feels like that's what Forman and Papushek are getting at with this, but why?
Yeah, but it's like you got the most boring version of the character you could have to analog yourself to, right? Like he's not having, and maybe that's the point, maybe the point is that he's this listless boy that has maybe some big dreams in him, but doesn't really have the, go get him attitude and the confidence to do it and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And that's fine if that's what it is. I don't particularly care about that, particular character struggle. But that whole dance sequence, I mean, yeah, it's mostly people having really weird, cringy interactions with each other. And this kid yelling hello.
Oh my God.
For a good fucking 5 minutes.
Oh my.
That was painful.
It was awful. I don't understand what, and it's funny, Chris, because when we were talking about this movie yesterday and you put it on Flex and I said, oh, it says it's a drama and a comedy. I don't know if that sequence of like in that dance scene was supposed to be comedic in any way, but, and again, cultural and language barriers, like what is funny in a 1964 Czechoslovakian movie is not necessarily going to be funny to me in 2023 in Ohio.
If there was a purpose to any of it, I think it would be more excusable. But when you just have character interactions between characters that we don't even understand their characterization, it all just rings hollow and falls flat. And what's interesting, Mike, you've kind of mentioned some of the other things that Forman has worked on. And again, I can't speak to this because I haven't seen those films, but the naturalistic style of shooting things is a Forman thing, right? Like that's a thing that he leans on a lot. At
least in these early films, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, not Amadeus and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but
right. And it's not necessarily unique to him inside of the Czech New Wave. I did mention Ivan Passer. He was doing kind of the same thing, but then you compare him to other Czech New Wave directors, and I'm not remembering a lot of others that do this kind of very floaty freestyle kind of thing. And I guess I'm thinking probably of like mid to later 60s. It feels like they were really kind of getting their feet under them in the earlier 60s. Things like Pearls of the Deep and those filmmakers that were involved with that. But yeah, it was interesting because he was still doing this more freeform stuff, even in 67. It's like that was his formula. And then he had to change once he left the US. I mean, I haven't seen and this is the thing. This should be Father Malone all month as well, because I haven't seen any of these films until this time. So I don't know if Taking Off is going to be more in the Fireman's Ball camp or more in the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest camp.
Well, what's interesting is this feels like a pale imitation to even someone like Wojtek Jasny.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was watching this thinking, oh, the Cassandra Cat and All My Good Countrymen are so much more interesting than this. And even All My Good Countrymen, again, like, that movie's, correct me if I'm wrong, 2.5 hours?
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
Right? I would rather rewatch that twice than watch this again, because by the end of this, it feels just like an interesting experiment in, the old versus the young, expectations versus wants. And that's fine. I think to your point, Jess, like we've seen this story before, obviously. This is not a new topic, but to tell it in such a way that they tell it here, it almost feels, not that it's not important, but it's like they don't grasp what is important about that and how to showcase it to the audience. What is important about these clashes between old and young, new and old, establishment versus, transgressivism. What are those? What does that mean? And the movie just throws it at you, but has no interest in actually getting into it, which again, Forman is at the early stages of his career. So I can't fault him for that. But yeah, it seems very water treading. I mean, you've mentioned it already, Mike, but that's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's a real shame because I really wanted, and this goes for all of these movies this month. I really want them to be good. I want them to be compelling. So hopefully this is just a rocky start for us. This is.
Well, how early, where does this fall in his career? Like, how many movies did he make before this?
Audition is 47 minutes long. And then what was the other one? I always script these early titles because, I keep calling it A Blonde in Love, but it's also Love's a Blonde. I'm trying to think of Audition, and then I mentioned it earlier.
Leave It to Me.
If they only ain't had them bands. That's a short as well. So this is really, that was 33 minutes. And I think they take that, like on the second run disc, they take that and Audition and have them both on the same disc. This is really his first feature. I wouldn't consider Lanterna Magica because that was a documentary.
It does feel like a student film in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely feels very, very rough around the edges.
Just in the minimal character.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's like, I mean, what's the easiest way to make a movie when you have a bunch of friends, right? Like, get your friends together, put the camera in front of them, and see what happens. I mean, see what comes of it. And I mean, that entire scene in the dance hall feels like that to a T. Because by the end of that scene, after it goes on for what feels like a half an hour. It's probably closer to about 15 minutes. But by the end of it, you're just like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, what is the point of this? Because if you're just going to meander here right now, like this, I don't know. It's just shocking to me. Because like you said, Jess, it feels very much like a filmmaker who is getting his legs beneath him and not from a visuals. I think this film is interesting to look at visually. It's shot, again, very naturalistically, a lot of natural lighting. It looks really nice, but that is not enough to carry it an hour and a half.
Right.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. Like, I don't think anybody who made this wanted to make a movie that feels kind of like a slice of life with no point. But that's like, when I was watching this, I was genuinely concerned what we were going to talk about, which does not happen very often when we do this. Ever, frankly. Like, it's so shocking to me because I had this expectation of Milos Forman. And again, I think my expectation will be fulfilled at some point this month. I'm sure it will be. But I guess I should have tempered my expectations against the idea that this is Czech New Wave. And this is a director who is not operating at the same capacity that a Jasny is at this time. Forman is 10 years behind Jasny, at least at this point.
Yeah, I won't disagree with you. And yeah, he does this much better when he goes on to his next film. I mean, Loves of a Blonde is still just a wonderful film. And what they do in Loves of a Blonde, they have such a similar thing of having a party scene, and you've got I think most of the female actresses in the movie are non-professionals. I'm trying to remember if our main character was a professional or not. And then you've got this group of soldiers there as well. And 2 of the 3 soldiers are non-professional actors, but then they take those 2 non-professional actors and they put Vladimir Menzik right in the middle of them, who I love, and who is also in he's been in pretty much every movie that we've talked about.
I was kind of disappointed he wasn't in this movie. I was like, where is that funny looking guy at? Come on, Mr. Czech film himself,
And that was really smart, because then he's the professional actor and he's able to bounce off of these unprofessional actors, and it makes them better by him kind of like reacting to them and pushing them into different situations. And it doesn't feel like they have an anchor in Black Peter. It feels like it is just like, okay, all of these people feel like they're not professional actors. I mean, his father, the guy that plays his father, definitely started off as a non-professional, but he was in a lot of things. And to me, he's the best part of the whole movie. Whenever he shows up, I'm just like, okay, this guy means business, and, you should really pay attention to what he's doing.
He has a force to be reckoned with in a way that no other character in the movie is.
Right.
Like, he has a distinct point of view. He has a distinct idea of how he thinks things should be. And he has a way of getting that across to people that many people, myself included, would probably consider to be abrasive or not problematic, but lacking tact, in a way that you often feel when an adult is talking down to you as a kid, right? So that, I mean, it comes across perfectly, but instead of it's feeling like he's speaking to me as the audience, he's speaking to someone who doesn't care, in the form of Peter, who is, again, it's just like, it's hard to get excited for him because he's just unexcitable completely. This movie actually, Mike, reminded me of that Yasny film that we watched for your show that wasn't the Cassandra Cat and All My Good Countrymen. It was Return to Paradise Lost. It has weird like floatiness, and like things just happen and none of it really matters. Like, there's no, like, with that movie, my biggest issue was there were no stakes. Everything was just like random people are doing random things. This feels so much like that. Just like, oh, we came to America and we're going to get pizza, and then we're going to go, and the kid got lost. And it's like, what does any of this fucking matter? Like, and that is, I felt the same way here. It's just like, if you're trying to make some grand point, I don't think you're making it as successfully as you think you are.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think Peter is probably one of the weakest parts of the movie, not just his character, but also his acting.
Right.
And then you get to like the guy that plays, and I can't remember his name, is it Zdenek, the bricklayer?
Right.
Yeah.
He's much more interesting. And then I think Forman realized this, because I want to say he comes back in Loves of a Blonde. It's like, yeah, he totally does. I just looked him up, and yeah, he's the main male character in Loves of a Blonde. And then the father comes back as well. It's just like, if anything, I think the bricklayer was much more interesting than this poor passive guy who can't stop shoplifters. And at the same time, I want to say that there's some sort of commentary going on as far as him having to stop shoplifters, and are people taking enough that they really need to stop that? There's always that loss when it comes to shops and everything. And there's that thing now where it's like, hey, if you see somebody shoplifting, like, baby items or staples or these kind of things, just leave them be. Just obviously they're going through some tough times, so you don't have to be a dick about it. And I'm wondering, like, is Peter trying to not be a dick about it, or is he just so completely powerless that he can't do anything?
I think the movie doesn't want to decide that. Like, I think that he doesn't, at no point does Peter ever make a decision on anything. He just literally just walks through the movie for most of it. And because we get nothing from this actor visually, like on his face or anything, when anybody's talking to him, it's hard to discern how he's actually feeling about the situation. Where is it like, oh, I'm just so shy and timid that, I am this weak person that this weak man that my father thinks I am? Or am I, making a statement by not stopping these people? We don't know, because we get no indication from anyone in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason his father is the best character in the movie is because he's the only character in the movie, essentially. Like, that's an actual character with, like Chris said, a defined point of view, a sort of bravado in his performance, as, kind of irritating and as old as it gets, having to go through these speeches that he gives. They are the only thing that like actually like speaks of any kind of passion in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look, we're telling a story at the bare bones. This is a story about a, late teens, early 20 something boy. And he does have a girlfriend, or, a girl that he's involved with. And I don't care about any of it. Like,
No.
Even like, they don't even go into any, like, she's in the movie, but they're not romantic with each other. There's no chemistry between the actors. I don't really understand the purpose that she serves in this movie whatsoever.
No, but she's got a really cool haircut.
Yeah.
It's so awesome.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Great. Yeah.
I think it maybe speaks to this idea of like the emasculation of Peter by his father.
Beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
But like, to what end? Like,
right.
Well, that's what Chris and I discussed this earlier, where I'm like, this is because, I'm looking at it a 2023 lens. It is a movie about toxic masculinity, but I don't think it realized its time talking about people of their time. And that's how, the mindset was then, and probably in that area. Again, I don't know. I'm not familiar with 1960s Czechoslovakia, but I assume that it's much like any other 1960s version of any other country, where it was very, men need to work, women need to be at home.
Right.
Right.
Well, and it makes that very apparent in the movie when we see his mother, right, who is essentially confined to the kitchen the entire film. So, or I guess the house.
What I don't know is if this movie is wanting us to, like, if it's trying to convince us that Peter does need to shape up and be a bricklayer, be a strong man and work with his hands and be, a real man for this woman and all these things, or if it is trying to have a commentary on, that form of, overbearingness. But I can't tell, because the movie makes no declarative statement on anything.
Well, and again, I don't think it's even interested in that. And that's, I think for me, that's the problem with this movie, is I'm not sure what it is interested in doing. If it's interested in telling this kind of, slice of life, day in the life of an Eastern European convenience store clerk, then that is the show.
Country boy.
Yeah, that is the movie that we get. But that in and of itself is not enough to mine. And I mean, it could be, but you got to have a character. I mean, it's weird that the only character in the movie is not our main character, the character who the film is named for, which the name Black Peter, it doesn't even have anything to do with the original title is
I was confused.
Peter and Paula. So
I
don't even understand.
Yeah, I was looking at I can't remember the name of the book, All the Beautiful Young Men and Women, I think it's called. It's a great book about Czech cinema, all from this writer's perspective, and he and Forman were friends. And so I was like, oh well, he and Forman were friends, he's got to be writing about Black Peter. And I was looking through the index and I was just like, no Black Peter, this is really weird. And then I found this whole section about Forman, so I'm reading it and I was like, oh, Peter and Paula, just like the subtitles say, because my subtitle said Peter and Paula, not Black Peter. And yeah, I mean, for folks listening at home, I mean, Black Peter was Santa Claus's assistant, I think, and I'm not seeing any of that here.
Sounds like a demonic goat
From The Witch.
Yeah.
I mean, from best I can tell, like you mentioned, Mike, Black Peter is Santa's assistant,
exactly.
Often in blackface.
I think so, yeah.
Which
He's
ain't
not,
which ain't great.
No. He's no, what is it, Nain Rouge, or what's the one that people all think is hilarious now around Christmas time? They're like,
Krampus?
Krampus. Yeah. Oh, I celebrate Krampus. It's like, yeah, funny.
Mike White is not amused by your bullshit, folks.
Yeah, sorry.
Is that the same response you give to someone when they say Die Hard is their favorite Christmas movie?
Oh boy, yeah.
You're so funny. What an edgy opinion you have. Please tell me more.
I'm all about that Black Christmas movie. Ha ha ha. Yeah.
I don't know what the title has to do with anything. I don't think it has anything to do with anything, at least not the way the movie is now. Right. I think, but again, one could even go as far as to say, to your point, Chess, calling it Peter and Paula means what? Like, that's not even part of the movie either. To
be honest, though, I mean, it makes a little more sense. It's Peter and Paula.
Right.
There they are.
And as much as there's literally two characters in this movie named Peter and Paula.
Right.
Watch them meander about the scenery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say something that's vaguely similar as far as a young man who's trying to get laid, because it doesn't even feel like he's trying to get laid that much.
No.
Which is really weird, because you would think he would be as horned up as the bricklayer.
Everybody else,
to get with that, like everybody else who's trying to get with that blonde, and then he fucks up because he goes after Paula, and it's like, okay, but I would say, watch Yuri Menzel's Closely Watched Trains instead, because then you actually have like a plot. There's a whole lot to it. Yeah. I think, I mentioned Pearls of the Deep earlier, and I think every single one of those shorts that's in there is based off of, I think it's Frabel short stories. They're short stories. They have a plot. They have to have a beginning, middle, and end. And this one just meanders way too much.
And what I ultimately don't understand is, at the end of the day, he goes on to make like 3 more Czechoslovakian films, and then goes to America, and then the movies that he makes in the United States are as far removed from this as humanly possible.
Oh yeah.
So is he a Czech New Wave director, or is he Milos Forman trying to force himself into the box of Czech New Wave and not necessarily being able to hang with the big boys, as one might say?
I feel like I would consider this to be fairly avant-garde, the way that it is plotless, the way that it is shot with these non-professional actors. I feel like he was kind of doing what the new wave was setting out to do, or at least other new wave movements. But then, Chris, we talked about Japanese new wave a few years ago, much more structured, and when I look at other Czech new wave films, they're much more structured. Like, of course, something like Daisies is super avant-garde, but you've got that, which is way out there, very surrealistic. And then you've got everything else that I can think of when it comes to the new wave, at least off the top of my head, was pretty structured. They had really solid stories. And, I think, like you mentioned, Cassandra Cat definitely has a very solid story. I think everything that I've ever talked about when it comes to Czech New Wave, other than Intimate Lighting, has a very strong story. And I will say I ran into the same issue when I was trying to talk about Intimate Lighting out last year on Czechtember. I was just like, what am I going to say about this movie? Thank God I had, I can't remember who both of my hosts were, but I know Spencer was one of them. And it's just like, thank God Spencer was there to kind of like, oh, well, I'm seeing this and I'm like, oh, good. I'm glad you're a film professor, because you're proving your mettle today, man.
Right. I was about to say, there's worse people to have on an episode about high cinema than a cinema professor.
Exactly.
God.
Yeah. Oh, it was Matthew Asprey Gear was my other co-host on that, who can also figure stuff out way better than I can. So, yeah.
I'm not even sure if there's something that we're missing here. I think the movie in and of itself is missing something on its own, because I don't. I mean,
it feels based on, I have not seen the other kind of movies that are in the same vein as this that he did after this. But judging like how you've described them and what they are, it kind of feels like this movie, being his first feature, was the work it out movie.
Oh,
you
definitely.
figure out how to make a movie, figure out what works in a movie, what doesn't work in a movie, and then redo it in your next one. Take, the things that you wanted to use in that movie, or that you did like in that movie, and then put them in this next one.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes more sense. It makes more sense to me in context of it being his first film and knowing what came after that, that it does now just even more so just feel like I just need to make a movie to say I made a movie and know how to do it. And now I can hone my craft.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody's early movies are going to be the original Evil Dead. Like,
right.
Not everybody can knock it out of the park first go.
I would say this is a good blueprint for what he does with the rest of his Czech career, at least his early Czech career, because he does come back eventually and does do Amadeus in Czechoslovakia. I think he even shot Ragtime in Czechoslovakia as well. So, he comes back, he makes good on it, but yeah, it's definitely very different from this early stuff is way different than what he's going to do later on.
Which is, I mean, again, like, you mentioned, obviously, I've never seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I've never seen Amadeus. Hell, I've never even seen Man on the Moon. So I've seen nothing. This is it. Again, like, is this a disappointment? I can't really even say, because I didn't know what to expect. In terms of it being a successful Czech New Wave film, I think it's a failure in being a one worth remembering and revisiting, because like I actually have been meaning to rewatch The Cassandra Cat, and I have been meaning to rewatch All My Good Countrymen, two movies that you cannot.
And now you got those beautiful Blu-rays, baby.
I know, and I'm on them too. There's this guy that sounds like me, and there's this guy that sounds like you doing commentary. What the actual fuck? But the thing is, like, those movies, longer than this one, more complex in what they're getting at, but. I'm just going to say this, and I know that this might sound like a stereotype, and in a lot of ways it totally is. This is not as much of a movie as I was expecting it to be from people that were making movies at the time, as in a movie that has something to say about something that's going on in Czechoslovakia at the time, because damn near everybody else who made these movies, I'm sure, had something to say. And I know Wojtek Jasny did in a movie that has a cat that can see fucking colors, which, yes. And then All My Good Countrymen, which, again, is a slice of life movie in a lot of ways that this one is. It's just, it has memorable characters. It has memorable set pieces. It has things that you can resonate with and remember, like the scene with, what's his first name? Mesnik
Vladimir
Mesnik in All My Good Countrymen, the scene with the chicken and the feathers. Like,
oh my God. Yeah.
Right. Like, just fantastic camera work and just blocking and everything. And just the music and his performance is so great. And that he gets that out of like 3 or 4 minutes. This movie is an hour and 20 minutes long. And by the end of it, it's just like, I rewatched it twice. And all I could think to myself was, I'm glad it's not any longer than an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm. I was kind of shocked when it was an hour and a half, just because his previous movies were, what did I say, 15 minutes or half an hour and 45 minutes. I was like, oh, this will be over in 70 minutes tops. And then when it was an hour and a half, I was like, oh my God, really? I had a difficult time making it through this one as well.
Wow. Is that common for you? I don't feel like that's not common for any of us, right?
It's not common for me, definitely with these movies. I mean, even if I just sit and I watch and I go, oh, I know that guy. Oh, that guy, and there's always interesting performances, but this one was just there weren't that many interesting performances. Like I said, the father I thought was good, and the bricklayer, and I think the bricklayer's boss, but that was about it. I was just like, okay, I'm not really in the bricklayer, obviously playing drunk. I usually have a hard time with people playing drunk. He was being very accurate though. And, once he fell asleep, I was like, oh, good. This is probably the last we're going to see of him in this movie, but he comes back.
I am. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This was a rough one. Like, it was pretty innocuously rough though. I feel like an hour and a half, ends up just, I don't know. I wanted more from this. And I just wanted so much more because I know what these movies can be. Like The Cassandra Cat. Like, what a wild. These Jess, these Czech movies are pretty nuts. Like, I've only seen a handful, but I'm sure, Mike, you've already spoken to some of them, but like some of these are really like high concept. Like, this movie is shockingly low concept for a Czech New Wave film. Like, I mean, you mentioned Japanese New Wave films, Mike. Like, this is like this is like nothing compared to even that. Like, it's just, there's so little happening here. It's shocking that this is not just a documentary. Like, if it were a documentary, maybe I could excuse it.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and it's interesting too, because like these early Forman films really remind me of a lot of like early Makavejev films as well, and that's the Yugoslavian new wave that's going on. But he always had two stories. He had, this is more of the documentary side of it, and this is more the narrative side of it. And it was always interesting the way that he would combine those. This reminds me a little bit of Man Is Not a Bird, but I would say that Man Is Not a Bird is actually closer to Loves of a Blonde because it's much better done. But you also have that idea of the non-professional actors as well. But it's just like, come on, like, yeah, this like I said, it was a rough draft, and it was super rough around the edges. And man, oh man, it was difficult. It was very difficult.
Does that ever work out for any director where they use non-traditional actors?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, his later stuff was great.
Right.
Yeah,
but like, I can't, like, I ask that question because it feels like this is a really good example of like how it fails spectacularly, almost to the point where it's like, why would anybody try this again? Like,
right.
But again, it's successful for other people. I just think I see a vision of Milos Forman on the set of this movie just looking harried, like just like it's fine, like great, whatever. Like, and I could totally see that because again, there's parts of this that just feel like somebody couldn't figure out, like the way this movie ends is, to use the word abrupt might be a fucking understatement. It's so shockingly abrupt that there is no ending to this movie. Like you mentioned, Jess, it's an anticlimax. Yeah. Somewhere Eric Andre and Tim and Eric are clapping their hands because they couldn't do an anticlimax that good.
I mean, it's funny because one of my film professors, my Eastern European film professor, who introduced me to all of these great Eastern European films, including the Czech New Wave, he described Audition, the previous Forman film, and he described it in such a beautiful way that I was just like, oh, wow, that sounds great. And then when I sat down to watch Audition, I was just like, I'm having such a hard time watching this thing. And that's only 45 minutes long. The way he described it was, okay, so Forman came in and there are all of these people and he puts on this fake audition for a role and then shoots all of these non-professional actors doing their audition and how nervous they are and all this stuff. And then he goes back. He's got one person. He's got a confederate amongst all of these non-professional actors who actually is his actress. So he shoots more with her behind the scenes. You know, he's got the other actresses there, the other women there. And then he will like follow her home and see her reaction to all this stuff or the stuff before the audition. And we follow her through that. And so suddenly you have a movie because you have all of these women doing this thing, but plus you have, you know, your actress who is walking you through the real structure of it. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really kind of a cool thing. Like I said, the description was so much better than the execution. And it feels, you know, he was doing this, he was trying it. He was very economically sound to do this because you're not paying these folks nearly as much, I think. But yeah, just kept missing the mark there. But he hits it with Loves of a Blonde.
And I think we would all agree that the sign of any quality filmmaker is the ability to adapt and change and get better with every movie. And, you know, again, I have seen, none of these other Forman films, but he does win an Academy Award at one point. So
Yeah.
Like, this is not, you know, like, oh, whatever happened to that Milos Forman? Like, no, we know what happened to that Milos Forman, you know.
Right.
We all know. So, like, I don't think any of us need to have any sort of like, oh, right, you know, that movie that they totally didn't win all these awards for. So it's just one of those things where it's, like you said, with your expectations of Audition, like if someone explained this movie to me and then I watched it, the way they explain it is going to obviously be a complete fallacy. Because if you were to like be like, hey, describe this movie to me, I'd be like, it's a story about a kid who doesn't know what he wants in life, and we spend a day with him. That already sounds more interesting than the movie that we actually get. So it's, I haven't seen very many movies like this one, and I'm not saying I don't want to see more of them, but it's it's interesting to see where a filmmaker starts. And that is probably the best thing that you can get from this, is an appreciation of where someone like Forman, who ends up having such a storied career, you can see even now, like, even as kind of not much of a movie as this is, we've given it plenty of compliments. It's a nice looking movie. It's well shot. It's well lit. It's just, it's not a story.
Right.
But that's a small component. It's a big component, but it is something that's fixable. I mean, if you're a shit director and you don't have an eye for it and you just can't figure out what you're doing, that can't fix that. Forman knows what he wants. It's just execution leaves a little bit to be desired, which again, clearly that ends up not being the case moving forward. So that's for me. I mean, yeah, is this disappointing? Sure. But at the same time, it fills me with a level of excitement to see where he goes from here. Because like you mentioned, Mike, you and I aren't talking about Amadeus, but friend of the show and writer on strike, Mr. Richard Haddam, wanted to do Amadeus. So him and I are going to do Amadeus at some point this month, which I'm excited for because, again, I know how important that movie is for Forman's career, at least, visibly for people who are just watching movies, not going to every single movie that they can catch. I mean, I feel like everybody saw Amadeus. Like everybody knows what that is. So, like that comparatively to Black Peter. Yeah, that's like, we're talking about a mile of distance or more. So,
well, and you really do owe it to yourself to watch Cuckoo's Nest as well.
I want to.
Yes.
I want to.
That would be my choice.
I'm glad you didn't pick it, Mike, because it would be the safe choice. But, it's on brand to not pick it.
I've never been the one for the safe choice.
No, fuck no, me either. Like, honestly, I mean, we can watch Cuckoo's Nest, but I'm sure it'll be like, oh, this was a good movie. Yeah, let's expound on how good it was.
Yeah.
Yes, it's good. Let me tell you how good it is. Which is like, this is like, it wasn't bad. I just don't know what you want. Like, what do you want from me? Like, what do you want me to say here?
It was neither good nor bad. It just purely exists.
Yeah. So Jess, I'll give you the floor first. Final thoughts on Black Peter, aka Peter and Paula.
I think you should just watch Amadeus and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Mike, what about you?
Yeah, interesting start. Wish it was better, but he definitely kicks it up a notch going forward. So I'm glad that I finally saw this one. Won't be revisiting it again anytime soon, but glad to have done it.
If you're a completionist, right? If you're a Milos Forman completionist, I think that this has to be in your viewing catalog. I think if you're probably into Czech New Wave, this has to be in your viewing catalog. But yeah, nobody is covering Black Peter with any sort of what's the word? Immediacy. Yeah, like no, you're not hearing anybody talking about this film. Is it available on is it a Kino?
On anything?
It's I think Criterion put it out actually, and then it was available on their channel. So as well as a ton of other new wave films. At least a few months ago, they had a whole spotlight. I don't know how Criterion channel works these days, but they had some great films out there, and I would recommend that you check out every one other than this one.
I mean, I agree. Realistically, go check out the Blu-rays for the Cassandra Cat and All My Good Countrymen. Yes, Mike and I are on them, so bias is bias, but those are better movies. And at least for me and what I can tell and what I have interpreted and researched through the things that you've given me and preparing for your episodes and commentaries, those are more indicative of what one would expect from Czech New Wave. If you watch this and this is your first Czech New Wave film, you will be disappointed. And you will probably ask yourself, what is all the fuss about? That's a shame. But at the same time, like you said, Mike, this is a starting place. This is not where we end up this month. So, we end up much further from this. So on the next Culture Cast for Mike White May, we're going to be taking a look at Taking Off. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of taking. You take. What do you ever give? Yeah.
And we are going to be joined once again by Mike and a newcomer to the show. But if you've listened to the projection booth before, you have heard Bill Ackerman over there plenty of times.
Oh, not that guy. Oh, man.
I don't even know him. I haven't even met him. I don't know.
He's a really very, very nice person.
I've heard nothing but good things. So we'll be joined on that episode, like I said, by Mike and Bill Ackerman. So until then, Jess, where can people find you if they were looking to hunt you down on the internet?
You can find me on Instagram at writer Jess Byard. Then there are plenty of other places to find me through there.
I'm glad that you added the on the internet, because at first I thought you were encouraging people to hunt Jess down.
Please do not.
No,
I will take your ass out.
Well, Mike, speaking of that, where can people pursue you if they were looking for you on the internet?
If they were coming after me, they should go to weirdingwaymedia.com, where you can find this show as well as pretty much everything else that we work on. It's a good source.
For the good stuff. For the stuff. It's a good source for the stuff.
The stuff.
You know what stuff we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, like Mike said, weirdingwaymedia.com is where you can go to find Mike's show, The Projection Booth, this show that you're listening to now, Bollywood Cinema Club, a show that I do all about Indian cinema. And hey, let's throw a random show out there just for shits and giggles. Susan Lambert Haddam and Susan Lambert Haddam and Sharon Johnson's 80s TV Ladies, which is hosted by, Richard Haddam's wife, Susan, who, if you think Richard is a good talker, folks, you have not heard 80s TV Ladies, which you should go check out over at weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, culturecast.com, patreon.com. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'll repeat it one more time. If you want to give money, Patreon. If not, like, rate, and review the show wherever you get it. More than likely, iTunes. Mike, thank you so much for joining me. You will be back. You have been invited back once again.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Jess, you will be back again at some point, but thank you both for joining me, obviously, and Mike for programming the month as well. So, as always, we'll catch you both on the next episode.